Hi there, and welcome to the fifth video in the series of Java programming. In this video, we're going to be looking at arrays, single-dimensional arrays, two-dimensional arrays, and array initializers. I'm going to be running through definitions and syntax and, why we use arrays, etc. Throughout the entirety of this video, if there's any questions you have or any ways you find that I can optimize my code, any mistakes, please feel free to email me here. I'm always open to hearing feedback, so be sure to do that should there be any. Without further ado, we're going to be completing these tasks right here, these three tasks. And the first one is to create a single dimensional array of 10 elements, assigning values to 3 of them and printing 1 of the elements. What's important to remember about arrays is that they're static data structure as we're using them here. So when I'm going to be creating these arrays, if I assign them that they have 10 indexes or 10 elements, then they will have 10 elements. It doesn't dynamically change like a dynamic data structure. But we'll be looking in the next tutorial at array lists, and they're totally different. So just bear in mind that these are all static data structures we're dealing with here. So let's go about looking at the method for the first task right here. So right here we have our array of type integer. It has 10 elements and we've initialized it as a new array. It's important to remember also that arrays can only store data of the same data type. So if you're going to create an integer array, it can only store integers. You can't go and store strings and integers at the same time. If you want to create a string array, then you just change these integer declarations here to string and you can create an array full of strings. But it's important to firstly declare what kind of array you're working with, and then to also understand that you can't go and put strings in an integer array. But this is our name of the array here, ARR, and we've got our square braces to define that it's an array. And we've got 10 elements. The other thing to remember is that if you've got 10 elements, the index will go from 0 to 9. It won't go from 0 to 10 because then that will be 11 elements. So when looking at an index within an array like here and assigning it, you have to remember that this is the first index value, but it's been given the index value as 0. So the final index value will be 9, and that's 10 elements within the array here. But we've gone and assigned values to 3 of the elements. We've assigned it to the index value 0, 1, and 9, and these are the values that we're assigning to those indexes. And this is how you would end up printing out one of them. So if we run that right now, we can see that the value 70 is printed out at the index 9 within this array. And that's relatively straightforward, the creating of the simple one-dimensional array right here of type integer, assigning values to it, and printing out that value. But then if we're going to get a big array of like size 50 or anything to a large scale, writing out the values like this is going to be extremely tedious and long. Even going with the full 10 elements, you don't want to go about filling and assigning a value to every element like this. And in that instance, we're going to go ahead and use an array initializer. So that's the second task, to create an array initializer. And these are more commonly used, and you'll see them more, and you'll probably end up using them more as opposed to this method. So let's go ahead and look at that now. So right here we've got our next array, and we've called this ARR1. It's single dimensional, and this is our array initializer syntax. We've got these curly braces here surrounding our elements within. Now this automatically counts the number of elements and says that that's that many indexes, this being index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it automatically does that for you, as opposed to having to write out all of these values here, which is super useful. So we've got our type of array here, the name of the array, and our values within the array. And then if we want to go ahead and print a certain element out, it just becomes a system.out.print, the name of our array, and in square braces the index that you want to print. So if it's index 2, over here you've got 0, 1, and 2. It should print the value 5. Go ahead and run that and see what happens. It prints the value 5. So this is using an array initializer. And that's all that they mean when they talk about array initializers being much simpler. That is an array initializer. So let's look at the third task now, creating a two-dimensional array, which is much more interesting, and using an initializer there, and printing the values in an array format. So that would mean, like, if it's going to be a 3x4 array, we print it in that format, and that's just about, you know, using system.out.print lines in the right area. So that's relatively simple, but let's go ahead and create a two-dimensional array. So right here we've got our two-dimensional array, and we've got our initializer right here, and you can see that the difference is that after we declare our name of the array right here, we've got two sets of square braces telling the IDE that we're working with a two-dimensional array as opposed to a one, where there's just one pair right here. We've got our type integer and our open brace and close brace here, and within them we have our elements of the two-dimensional array neatly laid out like this. Now, there is no syntax error that would appear if you laid it out like that. I just think it's much more aesthetically pleasing, much neater if it's laid out in this kind of format. But we can see, almost like in a matrix fashion, we've got 3 elements down and 4 elements across within our array, our two-dimensional array. And that is essentially how we initialize and create a two-dimensional array. And this is how we're going to go about printing it. We're using a nested for loop. So if any of you guys out there looked at my previous tutorial on loops, I spoke about using a nested for loop in traversing through and looking at the values within a two-dimensional array. And this is how we're going to go about doing it. So we've got our int x starting at 0 and ending at the value less than 3. So that's 2. So that's going to equate to 3 elements. So that'll be that. And it increments by 1 each time. And our nested for loop starts at 0, ends at 3, and increments by 1 each time, equating to 4 traversals. And within the nested for loop, we have our system.out.print, and then the printing of a value that corresponds to our x and y value as defined by the increments of the for loops. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about creating an aesthetically pleasing system right here. Without these two system.out.prints in these spaces right here, it'll just be concatenated and it wouldn't look, you know, very formatted out, and it wouldn't look structured. So all this does is just creates a line break at every 4 elements. I'll create another line break right here. And the structure of this is going to be, so when we hit this for loop here, and our first element, 1, is identified, the corresponding next elements are then also identified before it goes back to this outer for loop and starts again at the next row. So that's how our two-dimensional array is formed, and if we go ahead and print that out, there's our two-dimensional array right there. So that's a quick overview of one-dimensional and two-dimensional arrays, our static data type. And in the next tutorial, we're going to be looking at array lists, which are dynamic data types. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in an email to me right here, or to put them in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe, helps the channel grow. And until next time, good luck with your coding ventures.